Azeem, welcome to South Asian Stores. We are delighted to have you.
Samir, it's really great to be here, and I was really taken by the uh, theory and the practice of your podcast. So I'm excited to chat with you.
Yes, we are thrilled to have you. And as I was saying before we started recording, I'm a huge fan of your work and a subscriber to your newsletter, which has just been one of my joys of opening when I get it once a week. And but I want to start at the beginning, and tell me about Azeem and his childhood. Where did you grow up, and how South Asian was your family, and any favorite memories growing up?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that. It's a very interesting uh, and mottled patchwork uh, of a story that probably is best not started with me, and probably best started with my dad and my mum. So um, my dad was born in what was then known as British India, in a place called Mandi Hira Singh, which was near Lahore. Um, it was, as you might guess from its name, an area that was a mixed Sikh and Muslim. And after the independence of Pakistan and partition and so on, the family had by that point moved much more close to Lahore. And my dad ended up coming to the UK in his early 20s, where he did his postgraduate work in economics, in rural development economics, and he was at Oxford University. And he became a British citizen at that point. And then doing it as happened, he went back to Pakistan to take a job and get married, and married a woman who then subsequently a decade later became my mother. She well, maybe that's the wrong way of putting it, but I arrived a decade later. Um, and my mum's story is quite interesting as well because my dad's is quite traditional, with this wrinkle that he went off and did graduate studies abroad and then came back. My mum's story is different. So she was brought up in a place called Farid Court. Now, Farid Court was never part of the British Empire. It was one of the independent princely states, one of the smaller ones, as it happened, about 70 miles from what is now the India-Pakistan border. And her family, it was a Sikh state. The Maharaja was a Sikh, and her family was Muslim, and at the time of partition, she was young. She was about 7. Uh, they had to move pretty sharpishly out of Farid Court and take the hairy 60-mile journey across to the border. And
Wow.
in that time, as you'll know, there was a lot of violence, and internecine, interracial, intercultural violence. Neighbors turned on each other.
Mm, mm.
And my mum's story includes a moment where she, at the age of 7, together with her aunts, and uh, her mother had passed away by this stage, but aunts and uncles and cousins um, were bundled into a kila, which is a fort that the Maharaja um, would controlled. They knew the family, they knew the court. It was a small place, and they were guarded by his soldiers. And the fort was just a circular fort with a couple of rooms inside, very basic. And the crowds were coming. And my mum recounts how and it became then a sort of family story. The soldiers were told, if the door breaks, then you need to kill everybody inside the room.
Holy cow.
Yes, yeah. Um,
Wow.
and there was as a sense of the kind of violence, and it would be better to go by a bullet than to go by uh, any sort of other more extended, maybe perhaps more tortuous means. Um,
Yeah.
as it happened, they were able to get out, They had no sort of clothes with them, and other than what they had, it's not a. Many people had much worse stories. They got to the border, and with her uncle was in the civil service, her father was in the now Pakistani army. They were able to get accommodation, and my mom tells a story that they had no clothes, so the aunties um, took the curtains down and turned the curtains into clothes. So she and her cousins for a few weeks were all wearing reused curtains.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
so that is the that origin story, and we're going to talk about you know sort of background and career. But one interesting detail was that 48 years after partition, um, I got to know a guy who was the chief marketing officer of Apple at the time. His name was Sachiv Chahil, and we were chatting, and I was telling my story and this background story, and he said, "My auntie was the Maharani of Freed Court during partition."
No way.
And this man who I met when I was 36, when my mum was 50, how old was she? 1963 years old. Um, his family was from there, and I was able to get them on a Zoom call about 6 months ago, and she was able to talk about what she remembered from Freed Court,
Wow.
and he was able to share some of his memories. Although he's much younger, he wasn't sort of a contemporary of hers by any means. So the sort of loop continued. Um,
Yeah. And it kind of brings back to, what you're all about is using technology in ways that to, bring stories and people together. And you did that for your own family. Like, that must have been such a seminal moment for your mom. And, to get to, uh, you know, talk to someone who's been through the same situation that, you know, she
yeah,
did.
well, I think what was fascinating for her was that, and this speaks a lot to what you talk about. I mean, my mum grew up with Sikhs all around her because she was you know in this Sikh state, and she
Yep.
was used to their look, their bearing, their turbans, their style
Yeah.
of voice. And you go to Pakistan, and that's not going to happen, especially
Yep.
not in post-independent Pakistan. And when she saw him, it broke on Zoom. He's 20 years younger than her. It brought back to her those emotions she had had as a child. And of course, for him, he he understands what an elder is, and so he knows how to speak to her, and he is trying to tell the Freed Court story now as the individual stories of these uh, independent states is being lost as we move forward, and he's sort of running a project around that and around how partition divided communities that had lived together for thousands of years. So it was a really emotional moment for me to sort of observe and sit and
Yeah.
watch them, because my mother hasn't been back to Freed Court, and she's now of an age where that won't happen. Um, so for her to have that touch point, I think mattered quite a great deal.
Yeah. I can imagine. So, Azim, how did that identity, those stories of your parents, how did that influence you growing up?
Yeah. Um, well, it's interesting. So my parents are married. They're in the new Pakistan, and they moved to the UK. So my mum, is a has an undergraduate degree in economics. She speaks English. My dad speaks English. They come over to the UK, and they go to work here, and they have um, one daughter born in the UK. They decide to go back to Pakistan, and I never quite figured out why they decided to go back, but they did go back, and they had a second daughter in Pakistan, and their timing was terrible because it was the moment where Pakistan was saber rattling, and there was the '66 war with India, which Pakistan didn't do very well in. It's a sort of general trope of Pakistan's wars with India. And so they came back to the UK, and they were sitting in the UK for a while, um, and come 1971, and I think this is relevant. I feel this is really relevant to my story. Um, they're getting a bit itchy about just being in the UK, and they think there's more they can do. And they've both got this interest in, um, rural economics and development. And so my dad takes a job um, for the British, a thing called the Overseas Development Administration, which doesn't exist anymore. It's a bit like USAID. It's like a development aid group,
Mm-hmm.
to go to Zambia, which had become independent in 1964, to help set up some of the market institutions that are needed to kind of get the economy from basically being run by sort of hoodlum imperialists into something that's a bit more self-sufficient. So they shoot off to um, to Zambia, where I am born. So I'm born in Zambia,
Okay.
to someone who emigrated to India, to the UK, and then went off on an expat posting. So I'm both a first and a second generation immigrant to the
Yeah.
UK, which is quite weird, because then I finally come to the UK in 1980, and I have this very mottled, strange patchwork background.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what was it like coming to the UK in 1980? Did you, one of the things I'm so curious about is identity, right? Did you feel British? Did you feel Pakistani? Did you feel, any of the other patchwork? Like, what was that like growing up?
Well, let me tell you about what it was like when I landed on August the 30th, 1980, Heathrow Airport. And they had the signs were, if you've been to Heathrow, they're black on yellow. They were still black on yellow then. And we were met by my cousins, my dad's eldest brother, and the two older sons who would have been in their early 20s. And uh, they handed me, I was a skinny little thing, um, uh, 42 pounds or 45 pounds, which for like an 8-year-old kid is terrible, right? Um, and they handed me a chocolate bar, Cadbury's Dairy Milk, and
Yeah.
wow, I never tasted anything like that
You must have
before,
devoured it.
in a heartbeat. And then for decades thereafter, I mean, now I'm always running in an attempt to right the wrongs of the 80s. Um,
Yeah.
so I didn't really associate with being uh, English or British. I had an accent that was um, a cross between quite a deep African accent and quite an Pakistani accent. Um, and not of a modern Pakistani kid who's grown up with MTV, but like, no, not that at all. And I'd come from a really international school. So my school, which was the International School of Lusaka, had students from over 130 countries back in the day when the USSR was still one country, and so was the Yugoslav Republic, right? So there were only 170 countries worldwide, and it was incredibly international pupil and student cohort. So I had no idea of homogeneity um, in any sense of what was going to hit us when we got to the UK. Um, and in a strange way, I felt closer to America culturally because the school was an American owned school, although run by the British system. So all of our textbooks were kind of American, and I knew about Davy Crockett and Harriet Tubman and this
Hmm.
What's a good Woody Guthrie song? This land is your land, this land is our
Mm-hmm.
land. Yeah, I mean, I knew those words at the age of 7, but I didn't know like much about British culture. So it was a very, now I reflect on it, it's a very, very confusing
Yeah.
um, moment in time to arrive. Yeah.
Yeah. Got it. That must have been wild. That visual of you as an 8-year-old on Heathrow, like that sticks in my memory because so many people have had that phase of their life where they just don't know like who they are and finding who they are going to be. And then so fast forward through your life growing up, did you always have an interest in technology, or was that something you gathered later on in life?
So the Intel 4004 chip, which is the first mass-produced microprocessor, was released in October 1971, and I was born in 1972. Uh, and so I'm a child of the microprocessor revolution. I first saw a computer in 1979. Amazingly, my next door neighbor got a kit computer running CPM.
Oh
Um,
wow.
I don't know how the hell this is. It was actually a Sikh guy who lived next door to us. We lived in this set of houses. There was a Gujarati family on the left. We were a Punjabi family, and next to us was a Sikh family. Um, and he brought this thing back, and you plugged it into the TV and so on. And so we ended up getting like a Binatone games console. How we got it in Zambia, where there's no global supply chain, I have no idea. It arrived. I played Pong on it. Um, and then I got my first computer in 1981. It was a ZX81. I've got it here. I can show you. Hold on.
Yeah.
Here it is. ZX81 still works.
Wow. That looks
Um,
good.
yeah. Um, so I think I got interested quite uh, quite early on, and my schools, both my junior school and my high school, uh, my junior school literally had a computer, Sharp MZ80K, and then my high school had over 300 computers, the BBC
Wow.
micro computer, um, because of a deal, a relationship of some teacher or something or other. And um, so I did a lot of computing, um, you know, when I was younger. Yeah, so I got interested early, um, and even for something like the internet, I was on the internet from 1991, when I think
Yeah.
there was probably fewer than 10 million people on it.
You were a first mover on the internet. That's huge. Um, and then how did your career progress after that? Did you realize that okay, you have affinity, you have a liking for this type of space? Where did you go next, or what was the uh, big break for you, or something that you think about in your career that started it
Well,
all?
I was thinking about something that you said about um, doctors and engineers and lawyers before we did this recording, which is that sometimes that's often where people are sort of pushed and kind of driven. And
Yeah,
the thing that was interesting, I think, about my childhood was that I was really interested in computers, and I did things then. And now that I know the history of computing, and I think I can't actually believe that I was doing what I did then at home on the weekends. And I had no context because I lived in this
yeah,
town 60 miles from London, and there was no real industry, no one to say this is kind of amazing. No one was doing computer science. Uh, and but my other passion, which comes, I think, from my parents' background, is that I've been really interested in um, economics and philosophy and politics, not from a party political perspective, but from a sort of a power perspective, and had been, um, despite not showing that in my sort of academics. So when I um, went to university, um, even though I was very strong in the sciences, and virtually all of the careers I looked at were the sciences, the idea of doing computer science was completely forbidden. Not so much by my parents, but much more by the school, because that it wasn't the school itself wanted us to make safe choices. So I
mm,
was really good at
mm-hmm.
chemistry. I should go and do that. Um, but equally, I also didn't want to feel like I wanted to be um, pegged down a funnel where I would have become an industrial chemist at Pfizer and in Sandwich in Kent. And what I didn't realize, of course, is that my cohort went off and kind of worked on things like, Viagra and God knows what else. But
Yeah.
um, uh, the so when I went to university, I actually went in to read law, um, but I probably went in to read law because it would have been too much of a risk to do the degree that I changed to, which was an Oxford degree called Politics, Philosophy, and Economics. So when I got there, I did PP. I changed to PPE, which the university hated. They
Mm.
supported me in the end after spending a year studying law, um, and and it was an attempt by me to keep myself broad. right? That if I had gone off and done chemistry or something like that, I would have been very, very narrow at that point. Um,
Yeah.
and what it did though is it closed off my ability to actually go back into the sciences. And I think one of the problems with science education is that once you get off on the off ramp, you can't get back on. Um, and that's not so true with something like economics or philosophy, where you can kind of jump back in when you want. And so I took PPE um, uh, at Oxford in the end, and but I was also I audited such as you could computing courses. I took the C++ course
Hmm.
while I was there, and I did quite a lot with computers and with the internet in those early 90s. So when I graduated, um, I had defeated um, any framing of what it is for a
Yeah.
South Asian to graduate a good university, because um, I had still remember very clearly 57 job rejections. Um, so I left university, top two, three university in Europe, with a good degree, with a university prize, um, having edited student papers, having run and created societies, uh, and also I could program a computer. Um, I did not get a single job offer at
Wow.
all. No bank, no management consultancy. Those were the two big areas. No graduate program, no journalism program, um, no internships such as they were. And in the end, um, a magazine called Yacht and Yachting offered me 3 mornings a week to come in and sort of, when the receptionist was off, man the reception and make the coffee for people. So it was quite interesting, and it was quite a surprise and a shock. And I think it was the price of the idiosyncrasy of the path that I had chosen to take. If I hadn't have done the
Right.
student paper, if I hadn't have done the programming, um, it would have been much more straightforward for a management consultancy to look at my CV and say, yeah, yeah, we know what to do with this creature.
But the funny thing is, probably at that time was pretty disheartening to see, like, what your career aspects or prospects were. But now when you look back, probably all those inputs had a role into shaping to who you are and where your worldview and your insights are. Would you agree? Like, if you look at hindsight, like, were they all elements of who you are today, and how it shaped you?
Um, yeah, I mean, they are. There are also things that you don't realize. So
Sure.
I had been I had been setting things up and starting things for from the age of 12 or 13, and I didn't realize. I didn't know that. And now when I've
Mm.
been hiring people, which I have been for the last 25 years, I see it on CVs, particularly, I mean, initially with Americans and now with more and more Brits, people going, oh yeah, I set up the student paper when I was 14, and I organized the X society when I was Y. That's what's going to make me a great entrepreneur, because I know how to start things. Now, I'm not saying I'm a great entrepreneur. I mean, I'm not, but I am an entrepreneur. And uh, when I look back on my CV and I go, oh yeah, so I remember what happened at high school when they wouldn't let me join the official debating society because whatever whatever reason there was. So me and my friend Alexis set up a different debating society, and we got people
Yeah.
going. They came
Yeah.
to our society, and we got our debates. And you know what? That's what entrepreneurs do. And the same was true at university. We set up a new paper to compete with the 100-year-old incumbent, and we set out to beat it. And in many metrics, we did within a couple of years. Um, and we had this sort of initially ragtag group of rejects who were not allowed to work for the other paper, and it
Yeah.
turned out that they did great work, and many of them are now on the front the national nightly news in the UK. And
Yeah.
I can think, God, I knew you when you were 19 and writing news
Yeah.
stories. So I think the the patterns that we choose to select um, can come together to make a story. Um, Equally, I mean, I may have ended up being a a good accountant running a mid-tier firm in in the seventh largest town outside of London, and we would have gone back through my history and found the bridge points that said, "Oh yeah, this is why you're going to become an
Right.
accountant." But I think there was something in there. There was something in the sense that um, even though I've been credentialed by having been to a very good school and a good university, um, I don't set much stop by um, the need to do things within an institution, um, and that is, I think, a kind of entrepreneurial um, aspect that I think I've probably developed um, in the face of defeat and competition. um
Yeah.
that, oh, this door's closed to me, this door's closed to me, oh, this person's better at this than I am, she writes much better stories than I do, he's a better
Yeah.
negotiator, and I have to find my way through in order to survive. And um that process means that you let fewer things stop you, but only because you've been
Right.
stopped by everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. You develop this like resilience. Um,
Yeah.
so I want to switch gears and talking about exponential view, right? It has probably grown far bigger than you've ever imagined when you first started. Can you talk us through, tell us the listeners of how that came together,
Mhm.
and what the story behind exponential view is?
Yeah, I mean, it, in a way, it's kind of it's me. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
I've always been interested in economics and in development, and
Right.
I've always been interested in technology, and I've always been
Yeah.
interested in geopolitics. I mean, the first geopolitical thing I can remember, and I was not even 8, was Operation Eagle Claw. Was when Jimmy Carter sent those um, U.S. troops on the H-53 Sea Stallions to rescue the
Yeah.
hostages in the embassy, and it crashed. The thing failed. It crashed. 8 soldiers died,
Yeah.
and then they developed all these special forces that could do that sort of thing. I mean, I remember that as a 7-year-old. So, and what I do now in Exponential View is I talk about technology, and we try to figure out how it's impacting society more broadly. And
Yeah.
um, when I look back over my career, I have several years that touch on things like regulation and working as a journalist in
Right.
the Guardian and the
Right.
Economist and in media, and then several years as a investor and as a technology entrepreneur. So it kind of it maps back to sort of chaos of what I was interested in as a child. um, and so having sold my last startup in at the end of 2014, which
Yeah.
was a startup that did machine learning over large amounts of data for marketers. Um, we I felt that I needed to do something that was a bit broader, just spend my time. And I was working in the
Sure.
Acquirer,
Sure.
which is a fantastic company called Brandwatch, um, and I thought, if I just start to write a newsletter, now I should just give you a context. I first produced my first like published internet blog stuff was in about 94. So
Okay.
my first newsletter product that was launched was in 96. So I keep coming back to the newsletter as a format. I
Yeah.
quite like it. And so um, I just came back and I put this newsletter together and I sent it to 20 friends. It was actually called Azeem's Take on Disruption originally, because I didn't know
Okay.
what to call
Okay.
it. Um, and I didn't have any ambitions. I just thought, I'm going to do this because I disappeared for 8 years building a company, and I
Right.
focused
Right.
100% on it. And I just need to do something that allows me to express myself. That was all. That was the beginning and the end of it.
And how did it evolve from that point? It started as something you sent to your friends, but did it take on a life of its own over time, and to get
Hmm.
where it is today? Like, what's the evolution been like?
Yeah, I mean, I sent it to 21 people initially, and then within a few months, we were up at about 1,000 people receiving it, and a couple of people were really helpful. They were much younger than me. They were both trying to become venture capitalists or early stage investors, and um, one of them was just saying to me, this is really good, and you should keep doing this. And at the time, there weren't that many newsletters. There was in technology, there were two others that mattered. Um, and another was a a woman who's now a venture capitalist, who strangely his parents lived opposite mine, sorry, opposite me for a few
Yeah.
years, but I never knew her. And then when we were kind of getting to talk to each other, she said, "Oh yeah, no, I live there." And I said, like, "Oh well, then I know your dad, and he's kind of grumpy, isn't he?" Uh, and she said, you know, what she said to me, she had studied the same degree as me at university, and she said, you know, the thing is that you're the only person who is bringing that political economy take to technology, who actually understands the technology industry, because you know you've been in it since 1994, right? You knew Mozilla and Netscape and covered the IPOs, and
Yeah.
you worked in Silicon Valley and so on. And that for me was like the moment where I thought, oh yeah, there is something distinctive here, and and then I started to spend more time on it. But I was full time, and I had full time work um, until for the first 3 years, right? So I was writing this on the side. I was reading, um, you know, hundreds of thousands of words every month of. And if people haven't read Exponential View, you know, I'm as likely to put in an academic paper about, um, you know, new ways of thinking about GDP that's been published in some economics journal, as I am to put the latest TechCrunch funding news of a new hot startup, as I am to
Yeah.
review a deep learning breakthrough. So it's hard work, and there's a lot of reading involved, and there's a lot of talking to people um, involved. And I was doing that alongside my full-time job. But it was when you know, a few audits started coming in. Mark Andreessen, who invented the first web browser, um, he tweeted it saying, you know, just liked it. Fred Wilson, who's an investor in New York, one of the top venture capitalists in the world, wrote a blog post about how he liked it, and those things really sort of inflected the audience.
Mm.
And so we find ourselves today. It's 2020 and coming up to it's 21 actually 2021. So it's a 6th year anniversary in about 2 months time,
Wonderful.
and we've got about 56,000 people who read it on one of the platforms and 150,000 who read it on another platform. And there's a podcast, and there's a private community, and there are some other things that have come out around it.
Is there a Azim a moment where you're like, wow, like it's like a pinch me moment, like I didn't realize how big this has become, or is there something about the whole podcast and the newsletter or anything that makes you really proud? Any moment that you can think of?
You know, I think the thing is, it remains really hard work, and it remains fragile, and it only succeeds by my showing up every single day.
Yeah.
And there's you know, there's a line from a guy called Colonel Hal Moore, and Hal Moore was the unit commander of the first air mobile battalion that the US ever had, and he commanded that battalion in the Ia Drang Valley in 1964, when the first time US regular forces fought the North Vietnamese regular forces rather than, you know, the Viet Cong guerrillas. And Al Moore was a really inspirational leader, and he wrote a book about experiences. And of course, there's the film where Mel Gibson plays him, and he
Mm.
has this one line, which is there is there is always one more thing you can do to alter the odds of success in your favor, and after that one more thing, and after that one more thing, and after that one more thing. And another way of putting this is from the film series John Wick, where someone
Mm.
comments, it's really hard to stop a man, it's really hard to stop a man who doesn't give up. And I think that as an entrepreneur, that lesson, the Hal Moore line, which I remind myself of regularly, there's always something more you can do, um, is there as the kind of underlying clock speed
Yeah.
of the uh, of life. And so there were pinch me moments when certain people um, emailed and were in contact. Just, you know, when you get a senior executive who's built one of the biggest companies in the world, or the dominant company in their field, saying, this is the thing that I read, and it's been bad news for the Economist or for the Wall Street Journal, or I always read this before my broker research. Um, you you feel that is in a moment of
Yeah, yeah,
excitement. Um, but I think it's created creates a moment of obligation as well, because people are giving you their time. Everybody is
sure.
giving me their time. I mean, it's not just these sort of bigwig elite success people. I mean, everyone who reads it gives me their time, so that constructs an obligation. And so um, I kind of take the view that you have to just continue to show up um, every single day
Yeah,
and keep going. And there's always something extra that you can do. And there are moments you just don't have the energy to do that, and you just like, well, things are going to have to go off the boil for a few weeks while I sort of
right.
catch up. But yeah, no, I mean, yeah. So I think, just to kind of wrap that back up, there were a few years ago a few proof points that told me something new is happening, um, and what they end up doing though is they create um, a higher obligation on me to keep doing things that are useful.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Um, so what I'm curious to know is you process and take in all these informations from
Mm-hmm.
economics to technology to all these different disciplines. Is there something you can tell our listeners that you have really caught your eye that you're excited about? If you could boil down to just one or two things that you've seen that you're just like you cannot get out of your head because you're excited about, can you share that with us?
Do you mean technologies, or do you mean um,
Yeah, anything you
other
saw in your
things?
newsletter
Yeah.
or you wrote about or because you're on the like the bleeding edge of this, and people
Mm-hmm.
listening may not be. Is there something that you can talk about in the future that you're excited about, that either show up in your newsletter or not?
Mm. So there is so there's a thesis, right? There's a thesis behind the newsletter, and the thesis is that we are transitioning into what I call the exponential age, um, from the industrial age. And the industrial age was built on these industrial technologies that, um, as a result of how they operated, um, required a certain arrangement of our political and economic um, systems. By which I mean, you have diminishing marginal returns. The if you're a consumer goods company, the the 1 millionth ton of sugar syrup that you buy is going to be more expensive than the first ton that you buy, right? Because you get this, you just run out of supply, right? Once you get these
Right,
economies of scale, the curve
right,
bends, and that's Marshallian economics, right? And because of that, we organize our companies in particular ways. And because companies are organized this way, this is the way labor relationships are. And because labor relationships are this way, you express that in power and politics in a different way. So it kind of builds up from what the technology enables you to do. And my argument is that we've got new technologies, and we have new technologies that are changing dramatically, exponentially so, and they behave very, very differently. And
hmm,
just as we saw that the car or the telephone or electricity changed not just the way industry worked, but the way politics worked, and so true for the printing press, we should expect the same sort of change to happen now. But that the problem, there are reasons why that change doesn't happen um, in a kind of controlled way. Uh, and that reasoning is because a gap emerges between what are the potentials of the technology. The technology creates things that we don't even have words for. The first movies were called what? Talkies, right?
right.
In the first newscasts had presenters in bow ties reading the newspaper. Um, and if we don't have words for them, we can't build the institutions that allow us as a society to harness them properly.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's the underlying thesis of Exponential View, the newsletter. It will be in the book that's released later this year, um, and the uh, the thing is that the what I've learned in putting this together, first of all, is that there were lots of concepts that were unclear to people about why technology changes the way it does and why we should really believe in this idea of exponential improvement. Um, the second thing that came across was that um, I think this is a real battle of power,
Mm,
because the people who build the technology are the ones who now get the power. So much as they might want to democratize it, in a sense, they create a set of formal and informal gates about how people can understand it and ask the right questions. Um, and then there's a third aspect to that, which is the flip side of the same coin, which is that people who are not involved in technology have abrogated their responsibilities during this transition for all the hard thinking to be done by the technologists. And then they wake up and
mm.
they moan about YouTube's recommendation algorithm. And it's
Yeah,
like, it's been going on for a decade and it was all in the public domain, but you were watching Celebrity Love Island or America's Got Talent instead of
yeah,
reading the machine learning books and asking the critical questions. And so I think what I'm trying to do in the newsletter is both describe what's going on in a way that allows people to ask the right questions, but also speak to both sides of these two culture divides. Um, one of which is the sort of the world of technologists who build it, the VCs, the startup founders, the researchers, and the other is the group of people who live in the other world who are impacted by it but don't have a voice as participants, and because they don't have the language, and it's like, can you give them enough so that they can ask better questions? And I think people are asking better questions. I don't think it's just because of my newsletter with its limited reach,
yeah,
but it's because other things have shifted.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly right, and I think that thesis is so right because the pace of change has just accelerated even since when I was born, in the 1990s, and and just to see that evolve and how um, people's reaction to the technology and the changes is also big, and how much more involved they are because they have access to information like your newsletter and other things that they may not had before. So
Mm.
I think that's great. That's great.
Now, you asked
Okay,
about a technology that's a breakthrough. I'm going to give you one just for a
please,
second, which
please.
is so so we have we've gone through this period where computation has really dramatically shifted
Mm,
and changed. Like every 10 years, it gets 100 times more powerful, and it's going to continue to do that. Um, the But I think where we're going to apply it to is in the realm of what we've previously considered biology. And so we have developed all the amazing things we've done in biology, like kind of crop yields and medicines and so on, with really, really crude tools, super crude tools. And we've now started to apply the engineering way of thinking to the problems of biology, whether it's food production or disease reduction or the production of materials and chemicals and oils and lubricants. And we're starting to rethink how those different sectors of the economy work, and it's quite fundamental. So I think some of the most exciting areas will be in this general approach of taking a kind of computer science, um, empirical engineering driven approach to problems that we thought what lived in the biological
mm.
realm. And and I think given how important that biological realm is to us, because it's where we live as biological creatures, um, that will be a pretty dramatic uh, set of changes over the coming years.
That's that is going to be wild to see, and you see that already. Like, when you hear things about the CRISPR technology or things
Mhm.
like just this vaccine development, right, in record time.
Oh, yeah,
With
it's amazing.
yeah, it's incredible, and like, and people are seeing it with their own eyes, and I think that is going to be just a more testament to how technology and how these moving from crude tools to more advanced tools can affect your day-to-day life, as we work through these things.
Yeah.
um, Wonderful. So, in the last few minutes, I'd love to switch to our rapid fire questions. And again, these are
Hmm.
questions we ask all our guests, and I'm excited to hear, Azeem, what you
Cool.
have to say. So, the first question I have is is there an item that you have bought recently, item or service that you've bought recently that has dramatically improved your life?
Yeah, so I hurt my leg. No serious, nothing really serious. It's called the VMO muscle, and it's what runs on the inside of your leg, and it aligns your patella. And just from running too much, and so I couldn't run while I did sort of rehab, which basically
Mm,
means strengthening the leg, for about 3 months. And I may have told you that I ate a lot of dairy milk chocolate when I was 8 and first arrived in
yeah,
the UK. So I have sort of some sins of the past that I need to keep intact and control. And so, in order to kind of maintain a cardiac workout, I had an Oculus Quest 2, which on it has a game called Fit XR, which is a VR boxing game. And it sounds really dumb, but it was absolutely incredible. And I would do 600 to 650 calorie an hour workouts in it, while I couldn't run. And that's kind of what you would get at a decent paced long
yeah,
run, right? 6 to 650 calories an hour. And it was great because I didn't put any pressure on my leg and was able, while I couldn't run, and actually found it very painful to even walk down the stairs, um, to do 4 or 5 hours of that strenuous exercise every week. And
yeah.
now, actually, now that I can run again, I don't really pull out the Quest um, much. But yeah,
But
that's one example.
that's a great answer. That's a great answer. I love that.
Yeah.
Um, okay, second question is when you think of a South Asian person you look up to, it can be in your field or outside your field. Who would you say comes to mind and why?
I've been really blessed by getting to meet some really, really interesting people, not just
Yeah.
my family and my wife's family, who have an amazing story um, of their own. Um, there's someone who's had a big impact. I'm not going to share his name because he's a very private person, on me, and he's one of these people I think that everybody um, needs in their life. So he's a really, really thoughtful person who probably considers himself, I mean, I would certainly consider him a philosopher. Um, and he has this habit of asking a very deep question of you that somehow engages you, and you sort of feel like you're kind of a wind up toy that's just been wound enough and now you've got to get going. And he's able to do that, and he's really, really thoughtful, um and generous with his feedback. And so he matches this ability to come in and basically say your work is crap, try harder, with a hmm, such a powerful idea. And if you were also able to take these things on board, I think it would go even further.
Mm.
And he just has that moment, that kind of electric energy moment that he's able to bring to bear the questions. And he happens to be, yeah, he's from sort of India, Africa type of
Oh,
locale.
great,
Yeah.
great. That's wonderful. Okay. Next question is there a movie or book, Azim, that has had the most impact on you?
Um,
And it could be a recent book or something just comes to mind.
Well, I mean, academically, there is a book which I'm just turning around to look for, because I normally keep it within arm's reach of me. I seem to have, maybe it's on the, I think it may be on the other side of my desk. That is so strange. It's normally right there, which is a book by a Venezuelan economist called Carlota Perez, which is called Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital. And I think it's
Okay.
one of the best books that's written on technology at all. And, in a sense of its influence on me, um, it's influenced me because I use it in my work and have done for more than a decade, nearly every day. And in that book, Carlotta, quite a kind of technical book, makes the point that uh, general purpose technologies impact our economies in a set of very distinct phases that are related to the deployment of capital. And they start with a phase that is called the deployment, the installation phase. And in the installation phase, no one sees any productivity gains because you're building out the railroads, but you're not
Mm,
traveling on them. Because people then start to see the potential of this thing, you get a lot of speculation, you get hype, you get a bubble, and after the bubble comes a crash. And then after that crash, and people have righted their balance sheets, you're sitting there with a bunch of infrastructure, whether it's the internet or computing infrastructure or railway infrastructure that's laid out, that's just waiting for the applications to be built. And then you get
mm.
to the deployment phase, which is when you end up seeing golden ages of gains emerge. So Carlotta's book uh, was published in, I think, 2001, Technological Revolutions in Financial Capital, is something I think about actually probably most days. Yeah,
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, we'll,
yeah,
we'll absolutely link that. And thank you for the
yeah,
thesis behind it.
yeah.
Okay, these last two questions are some of my favorites, so I'm excited to hear
Okay.
what you have to say. Um, what advice would you give an up and coming South Asian person who's interested in doing something similar to you in terms of entrepreneurship, technology, economics, writing, newsletter? What advice would you give them and why?
Um, Practice makes things better, and so showing up and starting it and getting it done and doing it regularly, uh, it helps you learn, and it's through the process of learning that you get better at something. I mean, no one knows anything at any point, and it's only when you've done it a lot. And then I think um, for individual people, you need to be able to get the feedback, reflect on your own style, and make sure that you can adjust what you do. I mean, there's a very simple model of what is intelligence that comes out of people who think about artificial intelligence, which is it's about the ability for a system to read its environment, to understand its goals, to read its environment and figure out what it needs to do in its environment to achieve its goals, then to do that thing, and then ideally to figure out where it now is, what its new environment is, what has changed, and then to do the next action. And ideally that next action is slightly different from the one before because you've learned a little bit. And I
Mm,
think that that
mm,
is a kind of definition of intelligence that can be applied to anybody who wants to do something. I mean, to do it, you have to get started, and you have to be able to take the appropriate level of risk and the appropriate level of discomfort, which is um, not too little, but just not too much. And you have to figure out what that is. And in figuring that out, you have to figure that out yourself by the same process, right? The same learning process of taking a small experiment, seeing how well it worked, figuring it
yeah,
out, failing it, and so on. So I think in the old days, what people would say would be, Becca, you can't argue with a degree from Princeton.
right.
Um, and that may be true. Um, but in a sense, if you don't have that auto reflexivity, where you are able to reflect back on yourself and take lots of small bets that get better and better and more well informed, and you become better at the kind of bet you can take, you get better at the kind of environment you can read. um, you will constantly rely on the fact that you have certain set of letters behind your name, and at some point you'll be shown up.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. And I love how, you know, it's not only sometimes you have to find what you want, but also convince your parents that, hey, this is something that I want to do. And the traditional model of education and, prestige sometimes won't apply to this new world, and it's okay. So I love
Mm.
that answer, and I appreciate, blazing the path for so many people who want to do that, but may not have, the credentials or the mentorship to do that. Okay. Um, any final asks for the audience? Anything you'd like to leave them with before we close?
I think we're going into a really really dynamic point in history, uh, and it may last 5 years. I'd be surprised if it's short as that. It may take 20, 25, 30 years, and there'll be lots and lots of opportunities. I think the apart from this idea of how do you maintain an adaptability and a learning and a vectoring into the things that you do well, and how do you discover that? Um, you do need to have a solid basis for of tools that work in whatever domain that you want to be in. So that's not necessarily saying, um, you've got a pharmacy degree, so you can fall back on being a pharmacist if it doesn't work out. It's about saying, do you have the kind of baseline thinking and action tools that matter, roughly speaking, in the path that you're in? And some of those things we can enumerate because they are the things that you can learn in a course, right? Do you have basic probability and statistics? Can you do sort of structured thinking? Can you apply engineering methodologies? Do you have critical thinking? Do you know enough history? Are you going to get flummoxed if you have to talk to somebody about some CRISPR thing at a very high level? Um, do you know how to put an essay together and structure it logically? I mean, these are all what the Victorians used to call reading, writing, and arithmetic, the three R's. It's more complex today, but you have, better education, better resources, better food, more time um, to master those skills. But I think people need to emphasize getting that kind of a toolkit. It's not a blocker if you don't have the toolkit, because none of us are born with it. Some of the tools that I have and I use daily, um, I've had to learn painfully slowly on the job in my late 30s, right? So in the over the last 10 years. So it's never a journey that stops. So I think that having a baseline of a toolkit and not feeling that you have come to the end of what you need to know and therefore you go and apply it, I think is a really, really important um, role. I think the other thing that's quite important is to sniff out the mentors who are going to
Mm,
work for you, and figure out how to work with them. You don't always have the same mentor for a really long time because interests might diverge. But mentorship of some sort. I don't have formal mentors, but I have informal mentors who I can turn to for advice on X or Y. Becomes really, really critical. And I think the last thought I would make is that um, you kind of have to show up. So you have to have a track record. And when I was going into my career, having a track record was really hard because in order to prove that you could do the thing, you had to get a job doing the thing.
right,
And now
right.
there's nothing that you can't do short of create your own nuclear power station that you can't just do using the tools that are available because of the declining cost and the increasing capability of technology. And so you can literally start to do the thing early. And I think that the reality that you have to contend with is that when people in the market are doing the buying of whatever it is they're going to buy, your your Harvard degree uh, is probably not going to beat the brilliant YouTuber who's in your domain who's built up a following of 500,000 people.
Yep,
And so
yep.
there you've got a kind of a challenge of the value of the credential. And again, this is not to turn down the value of the credential. It's just to say that um, it's got to be supplemented by showing up. And when asked, well, you said you always said you're really interested in filmmaking. Let me see the films you've made. And you go, but that's why I'm applying for the job. That doesn't work anymore. I mean, it did
You're
work
right,
in perhaps in 1985. Um,
right.
yeah, so I think that was a compound answer to say acquire the toolkit, um, be prepared to acquire it over a long period of time, um, and make sure that even if well credentialed, you are doing the things around you that you need, and if possible, be supported by a mentor.
Wow. What a way to leave it. Thank you so much, Azim. This has been amazing. Thank you for your candor, for your stories, and all the insight you've done. And for everyone listening, we'll link to Exponential View. I hope you subscribe so you can hear directly from Azim. Where can people find you if they want to learn more?
If they want to learn more, go to Wikipedia or National Institutes of Health website or the Economist. But if you want to find me on the internet, I'm at Azeem on Twitter. I'm also on Clubhouse as Azeem.
Perfect. Perfect.
Great,
Thank you so, so much. We really appreciate it.
my pleasure.